Welcome back to the Mid-Year Mitch YouTube channel. In today's episode, we get our split window birdcage back from the powder coater. We have a lot of tips and tricks to go over on installing fiberglass panels as well as bonding strips to make sure you have a good solid foundation to build your car. So be sure to stick around. All right, so I just got the birdcage back from powder coating and it looks pretty awesome to me. It's always good to see them fresh powder coated, ready to go. It's a nice warm 8 degrees out here. So I'm gonna get this unloaded and get my new LS engine block mock-up kit in the garage. Let's get this thing unloaded, get it in the warm, and let's start skinning this thing in fiberglass. We have the birdcage on the Roadster Shop chassis, and now we can get a really good idea of the condition of it, and the powder coating just turned out awesome. This is going to be a really nice durable finish that's going to prevent this thing from rusting again. So now it's time for my favorite part, skinning this in fiberglass. Everybody always asks, will I sell a birdcage like this? No, because skinning them in fiberglass is my favorite part. So I grabbed a few of these bonding strips and laid them out just to make sure I had enough. And if you're not familiar with the construction of Corvettes, they took these pieces of fiberglass called bonding strips and they riveted them to the birdcage. So they had a mechanical attachment, and then they would scuff these and glue fiberglass on top, which would give you like your chemical bond. So that's how they did it back then. That's how we're going to continue to do it, but we need to start attaching these bonding strips. We also need to install these bonding strips here. These are the first ones that go on over here, and luckily we have a lot of the original holes. These are the original strips, so we'll get these scuffed up and pop rivet them in place. These hold the firewall, so we need to get these scuffed. Then I also want to get these rockers scuffed, the firewall plenums, and the firewall scuffed. We're going to get all those installed here in the next couple hours. And I want this birdcage to look like a cabin. We also need to scuff the floor. We're going to get all that stuff installed, then I'll work on these roof bonding strips once that's curing up. So I prepped all the panels I plan to glue with 36 grit. This is the finish that I'm going for. Pretty smooth. There's a couple chunks here, but I know that those aren't going to interfere. This is kind of what it starts out looking like, where there's a little bit extra glue, some hairs of fiber from the panel that went on top, and then you can see some areas are exposed glass like here. But what we want to do is make all that smooth, so that way there's a nice smooth transition. We can fill this up with glue. We know we're going to get a good mating surface, and we know we have a good bite here. We want to make sure that the glue adheres on all panels, whether it's interior or exterior. And this is structural. This is part of your floor. So you want to make sure that has a good bite. I also prepped the inside of the plenums so I could mount those. So the order of business here is we need to install these two bonding strips. Then the firewall goes on. Then we can put the front section of the floor in, the rockers, and then we can work on the firewall plenums. I have these two bonding strips installed. I like to put a bead of glue through here. They originally used sealant, but I use my 3M 08115. Just run a bead there to keep water from going between these two panels and causing some rust issues. So I put pop rivets the whole way through here, just like they did in the factory. There's a few down below, and if you replace some panels, you're gonna have to drill some holes. I'll go through here when I'm done and just smooth this up, and we'll scuff these just to make sure everything's level before we put the front end on. But that's further down the road. Now we need to install the firewall. The firewall glues right below this lip. So there's a bead of glue that runs the whole way along here. And the firewall also solid rivets in all of these little holes, not that big one, but all of these holes, the factory solid riveted the firewall in place after it was glued. So since this firewall came off of this car, it should, in theory, go back right where it was. It bolts in these two locations, and there were 1 or 2 shims in each of these locations, and a shim on each of these body mounts. So we're gonna recreate that. Now we have the firewall in place. I like to use some of these big clamps to pull it back this way. And you can see all of these holes in here line up the whole way across, so we know it's exactly where it was. It's centered up properly, and we have it pulled down against the bird cage, just in the process of installing it. Then we have the bolts that go here. There's one here. Those are tight, so that way that if this firewall is too high, that'll raise your front end up too high. So it's good to try to make sure everything sits flush on the bird cage, because if you got the bird cage right, you push the fiberglass exactly the way it was to where it wants to go, boom, your car is almost building itself. So now that we have that done, I just wanted to show you real quick. 3M 08115, this is the adhesive I use. 90-minute working time, 4-hour clamp time, 24-hour cure. You can speed this up by heating it up. I generally don't like to do that on big glue jobs like this. I let it cure up overnight. And it comes with these tips, and what I end up doing is cutting them off to work with my little gun. I cut them off at the bottom step, so I take off about that much of it. That gives me a lot more flow, and that prevents the gun from blowing out the tube out the back. This is the gun that I modified that came from overseas. But I modified it to work with this style tube, but I cut it short so that way we get all the flow out and I get a lot less cramps using this versus the manual one. So now it's time to glue the front floor in. I will dry fit it real quick, and I may throw some blocks of wood on the frame to space it up. We're gonna run glue along this front edge the whole way across. That's what glues it to the firewall. And then the rockers glue through here, and you can see there's a couple little chunks missing. We'll touch all that up once it's glued together. It'll just be easy. It'll be real quick. We'll tape it up and we'll fix all this damage at once, but that'll be in one of the next videos. So now let's go ahead and get this thing installed. And of course I had to tag the bird cage here, just in case. I highly doubt it, but just in case anybody is ever here, I want them to know that I was here first. Over on the floor, we had some interesting patches that were covering up these holes. Not really sure why these holes were here, but it turns out they are some kind of pipe and cigarette tobacco cans. So I don't know if there's a date on these or anything, but that's not a mid-year Mitch approved way to patch your floor. We'll patch these later because we're going to put a different transmission than would have came in here originally. Typically I would patch these holes before I glued the floor in, but we still need to do a transmission mock-up. Yesterday we glued a bunch of stuff together and I let all this stuff sit up overnight. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. All the glue seams look nice and clean. I kind of came back through here and added a little extra glue in areas I didn't think had enough. It's always important when you glue rockers or really any panel that you make sure they're fully seated against the steel panel behind them. And since these are brand new rockers, you can see that I need to drill a lot of holes in here to rivet them in place. I just ran some self-tappers through a few of them just to suck it down. I also put a couple self-tappers in the floor here. This is where one of the solid rivets goes for the floor brace underneath. There's another one back here in the seatbelt hole. I used the exact same size 3/16 screws, and that's the same as the rivet, so it doesn't change the diameter. I don't have to fill any extra holes. It just makes sure everything's sucked together nice and tight, and this big jaw clamp goes underneath the chassis, and with these boards I can put good pressure on it. So all that stuff turned out really nice. The firewall glued up nice. This all looks fine. We're gonna put a dynamic Corvette smooth firewall kit on this, so we just wanted to make sure everything was flush where it could be, and this is perfect. This is a really nice firewall. I did add a couple little screws because it's hard to get a clamp in here. I just wanted to make sure this is flat. If this bows out at all, that's going to mess up our smooth firewall installation. So all that looks really nice. I'm happy with the fit up. So now we got to get all our clamps off. I didn't deplete my clamps. I still have quite a bit more, but they've cured long enough, so we can get all this pulled off. Now it's time to add the bonding strips on the roof. We have a full set of new ones. I do have a new one for the back one, but I said let's just use the one that was on the car originally because it's in good shape. So I have them all laid out here. That's how they're going to fit on the car. What I'm going to do is come through here. Some of these are raised up a little bit. I think whenever they riveted them together, the bonding strip and the steel together, it must have pulled it up and kind of puckered it in some areas. So I'm going to tap some of those down to make sure this bonding strip sits flat. The back one will line up perfectly. The rest of them have these little dimples, which is where the rivet should go. So I'm just going to try to center them up, and hopefully we get close to the holes that are here. And I did replace this portion on the driver's side, so we'll have to drill some new holes. But we're going to put some glue, just like what we did on the windshield up here. We're going to put some glue just to make sure that moisture doesn't creep under here. Also want to make sure that these don't vibrate. This is what holds the roof on. Let's make sure we get a nice solid bond. There's no moisture concerns back here, but we're going to do the same. Just put a little glue in here just in case it decides to try to vibrate or anything. We'll just try to keep the car nice and quiet. So let's get all these mocked up. We got some work to do. I installed all the roof bonding strips the whole way around, and they all turned out nice. Like I said, I just put some glue down. I had to re-drill a lot of the holes. A lot of them didn't line up exactly right from the fiberglass into the steel, which is fine. We just drilled fresh holes, and they're all sealed up nice. A good thing to do is just to make sure it's flat the whole way across when you're working. You don't want to have a bow in it, and you want to make sure that the edge is consistent with the bird cage. If it overlaps a little bit or sinks under a little bit, that's okay, but you just want to try to keep it as parallel as possible. And if it starts to act a little weird in any areas, like this one probably should have had a rivet on the corner here, but I just put a clamp here and glued it in place. It'll be fine, but just keep an eye out for stuff like that, because if you do put a glue in here and it's sticking up, it'll cure like that, and then whenever you get to glue the roof skin on, there'll be a high spot. So you want to make sure everything's consistent the whole way around, and if you need to add another rivet or something, you can always do that. Then on the back, I used some of these larger pop rivets. Originally they had solid rivets in these middle ones where it had pop rivets on the ends. I just used pop rivets that are the same size as the solid rivets. I don't really think it matters. This isn't going to be an NCRS car. It's going to be quite the opposite, as you can see. So I really didn't stress about it. Now, to finish off the floor, this all needs to be riveted in place. The floor, the rockers, and everything need to be riveted to the bird cage to make sure it's all sucked down, because this is your platform. This went pretty quick for me, but you want to take your time if this is your first time doing this, because if the rockers I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch too high right here. You go to put your pillar on over top, now your holes don't line up for your striker, and if something's bowed out too far, now your quarter panel won't fit. Or if this pillar sits up too high, you put your front end on, and the front end's too high compared to your door. So there's a lot of things you need to pay attention to. As long as things are flush, things like this, you can see how nice and tight this fits up against here. That tells us that this is in the same spot that it was originally. You can see that these holes are basically concentric. That tells us we're in the right ballpark. That's the kind of stuff you want to see to make sure stuff is lining up the way it did originally. And like I said, solid rivets go across here. I'm just gonna let this stuff cure up. I'm going to put solid rivets in there like there was originally, but I kind of like to let this glue get hard before I go at it with that, because it's a little bit of a violent process. Also, I have like hundreds of these little pins everywhere, so it looks like an episode of Demolition Ranch with shells everywhere. We just got them scattered, so I got a lot of cleaning up here to do. So right now would be a perfect time to glue the back end onto this car, but based on the repairs that this car needs, I decided to change it up a little bit. So the next video will be me putting the back end, mocking it up on this car, and we need to start working on putting in the dynamic big tub rear floor. And then I need to work on modifying this transmission tunnel to fit our drivetrain, because you can see how low the drive shaft tunnel is here, and look how high the rear end is. So all of this needs to come up a little bit. I need to put body mounts on the bird cage so we can figure out exactly how high we need to make the tunnel. We'll do our modifications, finish up the floor, and then I'll glue the back end on this car. So it's gonna start looking like a car pretty quick here. Hope you guys enjoy the series. It's funny, after all this work, it's starting to look like what I started with. It's just a lot cleaner, neater, tidier, and it's right. But that's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We have a lot of work to do on this split window, which you'll see next week. This is gonna be a good series that you're not gonna wanna miss. And I also appreciate the support that we've been getting on the Facebook groups. Those have been slowly growing, and I've been seeing people post their questions on there and having people answer them. So I really appreciate that. We're really growing a community on there, and I think that's really important to kind of help keep this information going and help each other out. So I really appreciate that. We've got a lot of stuff coming on this car. I'm really excited about this project. For me, this is the fun part, skinning it in fiberglass, seeing it come to life. So I hope you guys are enjoying this series. We've got some cool stuff coming up. So I got a lot of work to do, and I'll catch you guys later.